Welcome everyone. Welcome to the additional practice questions lecture series. The topic that we will be doing is miscellaneous. So right now we have what we have covered in this additional practice question series within sentence correction are questions around subject verb agreement, parallelism, modifiers and tenses, which are almost like the core of your entire sentence correction. But there are few other topics which are miscellaneous in nature like articles, redundancy, structure formation, idioms, which will come time and again in these exams to kind of test you on these aspects. So, this lecture is based on those miscellaneous topics. I had already made a concept video on miscellaneous topics. I request you to go to that video in case you haven't watched that before coming to these questions. Let's move ahead. Let's look at the first question. It says that some economists contend that the way markets react to financial news are based. What are based? Some economists contend that the way markets react to financial news. So basically, we're talking about the reaction. So we are talking about the reaction. And we know that reaction is singular and R is plural. So that's the mismatch. We'll have to look for a singular entity. Some economists contend that the way markets react to financial news are based wrong, Has been based is pretty out of context. So that's out of context. So that's gone. Now we boil down to C and D. Is based as much on irrational fears and expectations than on. So that C. D says is based as much on irrational fears and expectations as on. Now the point to understand is, and we'll again go back to our understanding of structures. We'll say that anything which starts with as let's say good as. So the point is anything which starts with as has to continue for it to form a coherent structure. And that's the problem in option C where you say is based as much on the irrational fears then. So it is the mismatch of as and then which makes it wrong, and the right answer has to be is based as much on irrational fears and expectations as on. So this was a nice question to start up with. First of all, the question we checked what is this subject verb pair that we are trying to address, and at the same time we also looked at certain structures like structures which always come together, and then we noticed that as will always follow as and as will not follow then. And these are like some of the best practices that we use within the whole gamut of structure understanding in English. I hope this question is clear. Let's move on to the next one. Now it says researchers studying the brain scans of volunteers who pondered ethical dilemmas have found that the basis for making tough moral judgments is emotion, not logic or analytical reasoning. Now, 2-3 things are happening here. One is let's just break this thing down. So, researchers are studying. What are they studying? Brain scans of volunteers. And these volunteers are pondering or have pondered over ethical dilemmas. So basically, they have thought about ethical dilemmas. And after studying the brain scans of this, they have found, the researchers have found, so that's my link here, have found that the basis, I'll just use a quick to make tough decisions. That's how it is broken. If you look at the structure, although it's a complex sentence, but what we're trying to do is just break the structure into an easier form. So the researchers are studying the brain scans of volunteers, and the volunteers are pondering over ethical dilemmas. And after this study, the researchers found out the basis to make tough decisions. And that's the intent typically which has to be cleared from my answer. If I look at the first one, it says researchers studying the brain scans of volunteers who pondered ethical dilemmas have found. It seems that the ethical dilemmas have found, and which is not clear. The researchers studying the brain scans of volunteers who pondered ethical dilemmas and found. So this and tells me that who found are the researchers, which is exactly the matrix that I drew initially. The basis to make tough moral decisions to be emotion, not logic or analytical reasoning. Now this could be an answer. Let's look at C. Researchers studying the brain scans of volunteers pondering ethical dilemmas and found. So the first point is researchers studying the brain scans of volunteers pondering ethical dilemmas. It seems that the scanning is happening while the volunteers are pondering, which is not very clear in terms of the meaning. So that's gone. Volunteers' brain scans, the researchers studying volunteers' brain scans while pondering. It's the same problem. The brain scans are being researched while pondering. So that's not very clear. Have found. Again, it seems that the dilemmas have found. So that's gone. The same problem exists here. Volunteer brain scans while they pondered. Now, who is this they referred to? Is it referring to the volunteers or is it referring to the researchers? So the reference to they is not clear. So that's why E is gone. And the answer has to be B, where you say the brain scans of volunteers who pondered ethical dilemmas and found the basis to tough moral decisions. So brain scans are studied by researchers, volunteers are pondering over ethical dilemmas, and the researchers found the basis. So this and basically tells you that it is the researchers who found the basis to make tough moral decisions to be emotion, not logic or analytical reasoning. I hope this question is clear. Let's move on to the next one. Now it says, according to a new report by Surgeon General, women with less than a high school education had 3 times the likelihood that they would begin smoking as women who went to the college. Now the first thing that strikes me is this structure as, and we have done that in one of our previous questions, that if you have an as at the end, it has to begin with an as in the beginning. So I'm just going to try with that. Had 3 times the likelihood that they would begin smoking. Had 3 times the likelihood of beginning smoking. This women with, so this they is unnecessary because you already know that you're referring to women. So this is not needed. So that's gone. According to new report by Surgeon General, women with less than a high school education had 3 times the likelihood of beginning smoking. Likelihood of beginning smoking as women. Okay. So this structure will park it. So for now, were 3 times more likely to begin to smoke. Were 3 times more likely to begin to smoke. And if I look at B and C, it's pretty clear that according to a report, so the report is in present. So the report that is coming out is in present tense. And had is used when the action is completed in the past. So this option is gone. Now you have all 3 options with were 3 times more likely to begin to smoke, were 3 times more likely that they would begin. Again, the problem is unnecessary use of they, so D is definitely eliminated. Between C and E, I'm just going to read it together. Were 3 times more likely as likely to begin smoking, to begin to smoke, and to begin to smoke versus more likely, and it says as likely, and I know that my initial structure which is correct in the sentence is as, so this looks to be the structure that will obviously make it correct, and therefore the answer is E. Quite a slightly tricky question in terms of understanding how to reach to the answer, but what we really essentially did was, one, used our understanding around tenses and also used our understanding around structures to see that how would we eliminate the point of had, and also we checked that when 2 options were very close, the one which matches to our structure has to be the right answer, and therefore the answer is E. I hope this is clear. Let's move on to the next question. Now it says that Muhammad Ali is a former American boxer and 3-time world heavyweight champion who, as it can be said, was well known for his fighting style described as float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Now, what it says is Muhammad Ali is a former American boxer and 3-time world heavyweight champion who, as it can be said, so this is a very worded expression, as it can be said. So I'll park this for now, but it looks to be pretty verbose. Coincidentally, we'll park it. As it is a fact is again the same problem. It is pretty worded. So these are all eliminated, A and C. Incidentally is quite well known. Okay, we'll park this. Being a true fact again is very worded, so that's gone. Now between B and D, coincidentally comes like something which is unexpected. And just by reading the sentence, it seems that the fact that Muhammad Ali is a former American boxer and three-time world heavyweight champion, his fighting style, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, should not be unexpected and has to be on the expected lines. So with that logic, I'm going to eliminate B, and the answer has to be D, where you say incidentally, like other than the fact that he's a three-time world heavyweight champion, he's incidentally quite well known for his fighting style, and this kind of matches with the lines of expectation, with the lines of expectation, and therefore is the right answer. I hope this concept was clear to you. Let's move on to the next one. Now it says that according to a recent study of consumer spending on prescription medications, increases in the sales of 50 drugs that were advertised most heavily. So drugs that were advertised, right? So it has to be in past tense. First thought. Heavily accounts is present, and that's gone. Heavily were what accounted, this is very very worded, gone. Heavily accounted could be an answer, we'll just park it. Heavily accounting is again in present, so that's gone. Heavily which accounted, so it seems that the which is referring to heavily, which is not the point to understand. So if I have to just compare C and E, I'll see that according to a recent study of consumer spending on prescription medications, increase in the sales of the 50 drugs that were advertised most heavily accounted for which. Now this which has to refer to drugs ideally, but is actually referring to heavily. This makes it E is incorrect, and the answer has to be C, which says that heavily accounted for almost half of the $20.8 billion increase in the drug spending last year. The remainder of the increase coming from sales of 9,850 prescriptions. So this question, although looked a bit complex, but we could have easily figured out the answer just from a context of the tense. To identify whether the tense is in past tense or present tense is absolutely critical, especially in solving these type of questions where the structure and the alignment are absolutely critical. And we also saw that how unnecessary modifiers like these do not really modify the right words which are intended. And that's how we got to the answer of C, and that's the right answer. Let's look at the next question. It says that the brightness on earth, so what are you referring to? Brightness on earth of such celestial bodies like stars invariably depends both on the radius of the luminescent object and its temperature. So just by looking at these options, let's first start by identifying the difference between, let's say, like and such as. So like basically refers to objects which are similar in nature, such as is typically an example. So for example, if I say like a monkey, it means similar to a monkey, but not an actual monkey. But if I say you are such, or for example, let me just remove this is a wrong example. If I make a sentence like I am associated with PETA to save animals such as monkeys, rabbits, and so on. So the point here is, if you say like a monkey, it obviously means similar to a monkey and not a monkey. But if you look at this sentence number 2, it says I am associated with PETA to save animals such as monkeys. So you're actually trying to save monkeys and rabbits. So the difference, this difference has to be very clear in your head when you're doing questions like this. So the question says the brightness on earth of such celestial bodies like stars, but you're actually referring to the stars, so it can't be like stars. So all these options are eliminated. Between C, D and E, you have to look for as stars. Invariably depends. So why is it depends? Because you're referring to brightness. Brightness is singular and depends is also singular. As stars invariably depends on 1. Both the radius and on its temperature. On both the radius and on its temperature. This looks to be an answer, as stars invariably depends both on the radius and its temperature. So it should be on its temperature because you're referring to the temperature of the star. So D is gone. As stars, celestial bodies as stars invariably depends both on the radius. As stars invariably depends both on the radius of the luminescent object and on its temperature. On the radius, on its temperature. So this versus C, if you were to compare, let's look at the comparison again. As stars invariably depends on both the radius, both on the radius. Depends both, one on the radius, on the temperature. This definitely is the right answer. Let's look at another concept to just elucidate my point further, and for that I'm just gonna rub this off quickly. So the point that we are using is, let's take an example. Ram has only 2 sons. Number 2 is only Ram has, let's say, 2 sons. When you say only 2 sons versus only Ram, the fact is the placement of the word modifies what the intention of the meaning. For example, Ram has only 2 sons modifies that he has no daughter, and only Ram has 2 sons modifies the fact that only Ram and nobody else has 2 sons. Similarly, if you say both the radius and you say or as stars invariably depends on both the radius versus depends both on the radius. So the fact that both is the modifier where you have to modify 2 things, 1 on the radius and 2 on its temperature. So in terms of positioning of the word in the sentence is very clear in E, and hence E is the answer. I hope this clarity has given you the confidence to get such questions. Let's go to the next one. Now it says that proponents of artificial intelligence say that they'll be able to make computers that can understand English and other human languages. Recognize. So it is understand, recognize, and reason. So these are parallel, as an expert does. So reason as an expert or reason like an expert, because you are essentially saying that we are creating machines or computers that can reason like one expert. So all options with as is gone. This is gone. So now you're left with C, D, and E. Like an expert, let's look at D first. Proponents of artificial intelligence say that they'll be able to make computers that can understand English and other human languages, recognize objects, and reason like an expert. The use of which, again, is the which referring to the expert? We don't know. That's the ambiguity, and therefore it is gone. So between C and E, like an expert, to be used to diagnose equipment, it seems that the expert is used to diagnose equipment breakdowns. Diagnose, deciding, again verbs in the different forms. So this is, and this is verb in ing. So what they essentially, what we are saying is they are in not in the same form. And since they're not in the same form, that's eliminated. Answer has to be C when you say proponents of artificial intelligence say that they'll be able to make computers that can understand English and other human languages, recognize objects, and reason like an expert. Computers that will be used for such purposes as, so for example is such as, always remember, such as, indicate. For example, computers that will be used for such purposes as diagnosing breakdowns, 1, and 2, parallel, whether to authorize a loan. So the point to understand here was, 1, distinguish in terms of as and like, and number 2, checking whether the elements were parallel throughout the structure of the sentence, and which made option number C as the right answer. I hope this point was also very clear. Let's look at next question. It says, building on civilizations that preceded them in the coastal Peru, the Moquicha developed their own elaborate society based on cultivating crops such as corn and beans, cultivating, harvesting, and exploiting. Now, we'll have to first understand the 3 forms. Cultivating, harvesting and exploiting. Now what we need to do as a thumb rule is make them parallel. So if you look at the first one, cultivating is verb, harvesting is a noun, exploiting is a verb, so that's not parallel. Cultivation is a noun, harvesting is a noun, exploitation is a noun. This has to be parallel and most probably is the right answer. Let's look at the third one, and basing it on cultivation, harvesting and exploiting. Again, this is not parallel. And they based, who is this they referring to? The Mochicha developed, they based it on their cultivation of crops, the harvest and exploiting. Again, the same problem. Harvest and exploiting, not in the same form. Exploited, harvest, cultivating, not in the same form. So the right answer has to be B. When you say that the building on civilizations that preceded them in coastal Peru, the Mochica developed their own elaborate society based on cultivation of such crops. So cultivation is the noun form. Harvesting of fish, so harvesting is another noun form. And the exploitation of wild resources, this is another noun form. So noun, 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 that's parallel, and B is the right answer. I hope this has given you good understanding. Let's move on to the next question. It says that Minerva Consulting has a budget about same as the largest consulting firms in the state, like this thing. Now consulting firms in the state, so this cannot be like, this has to be as. So let me just remove everything with like. So this is gone. What else can we remove? This is gone, like. So now you're left with either B, C or E. It says that the budget of Minerva Consulting is almost like equivalent to the budget of the consulting firms, but their workforce is only 24 and most of the people who are in the workforce have advanced degrees. That's the intent of the question. Now if I were to look at the options, it says Minerva Consulting has a budget of about the same as largest consulting firms. It seems about the same, is about the same, comparable. Just by looking these three words, I can say that option B and C are worded. The better word, instead of saying about the same, you can say comparable. Minerva Consulting has a budget comparable to those of, so those automatically refers to the point of budget of the largest consulting firms in the state. Such as is very clear because we did not want a like. We are actually referring to the consulting firms such as Cost, Stonehouse or McKinsey, but a workforce of only 24, all of whom, this whom refers to the workforce, have advanced degrees, and this has to be the right answer. One, it is crisp. Number two, it also eliminates the point of the error when instead of using like, we ended up using such as, and this has the right modifier whom for the workforce. I hope this concept was also clear. These questions that we have done so far should give you enough understanding around the miscellaneous questions, and that brings me to the end of additional practice questions for the entire sentence correction series. Throughout the series, we have looked at all possible type of difficult questions that can come from sentence corrections. You can use these concepts, you can apply these applications and conceptual awareness in exams like GMAT, CAT and SAT. Remember, the questions that we have done are pretty tricky to start with. They are not the easy questions. So I request you to go through each of these videos maybe a couple of more times in order to understand it slightly better and try and use these elimination techniques that we have seen in all these videos in the future questions that you will be addressing. Thank you so much for your time.